Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today I'm returning to the CNN-New Hampshire Primary poll done with University of New Hampshire's Survey Center. As you can see, this is the primary poll for February 6th to the 9th. The last one I did was from the 4th to the 7th. Now I want to clarify something I mentioned in the last video. This is in fact a tracking poll. I think I got my words a tad jumbled up when explaining last time. However, it's a tracking poll over a 4 to 5 day period, as opposed to a tracking poll over a 2-day period, which are much more volatile. This still falls to some of the same issues you can have with tracking polls, i.e. you bring it up with people and they become more politically engaged. However, with this poll, there are enough people involved, and the fact that they are doing it over a long period of time helps nullify some of these effects and help us look more at trends, as opposed to the issue of an individual voter keeps switching every other day. For those of you who remember back to 2016, there was an instance where every other day you'd get a headline of how Trump is surging with black support, then falling again, where in a tracking poll where there, I believe, were 3 black people, one kept changing his mind on whether or not he liked Trump, causing him to jump up and down with black support. But anyway, let's dive in, and I want you to understand I'll be comparing this to the 4th through 7th poll, not including the middle one. I just think long-term trends are a little bit easier to follow. Not to mention, this is, I believe, the last CNN poll we're getting out before the primary. And so I want to compare a little bit more time, and it's as close as we're going to get from a pre-debate poll to a post-debate poll. The debate was on the 7th, so half of this was done after the debate. But as you can see, the most notable change that's happened so far from this one to this one is definitely decided decreased by a point, still trying to decide decreased as well, and the main one that increased was leaning towards someone. Now keep in mind these are rounded numbers, so rounding down and rounding up results in a little bit of us missing some of the data, but overall we can trust these numbers. And what this says to me, and we'll get more into it later as we dive down to the meat and potatoes of this, where we look at how definite people are based on their preferred candidate. Forgive me. It's a big sign that the debate had a massive effect on who people are voting for, and I think it actually shows an interesting dichotomy that could really help Joe Biden, actually. But we'll get down to that in a moment. First off, we have the actual numbers, what people say their preferred candidate for the nomination is. 29 Sanders, 22 Buttigieg, 11% Biden, 10 Warren, 7 Klobuchar, 5 Gabbard, 4 Yang, 1 Steyer, and 10% undecided, with 1% to kick around for bonuses. Now, as you can see, if we compare the two sections, what I will loosely describe as pre- and post-debate, you can see Sanders and Buttigieg have both gained a point. Biden has remained constant. Warren has gained a point. Klobuchar has gained 2 points, I believe. Yang has dropped a point. Steyer has dropped a point. Yang has gained a point, and everyone else has dropped down, I believe. And undecided has remained stagnant at 10%. This is very interesting to me, and I'm going to posit a little bit of a theory what's happening here. Pete Buttigieg's 2 biggest days were the 6th and the 7th, which have been included in all of these debates and have been averaged out by him having lower polling days on either the front or the back end, or in the case of this one, the middle end. Which makes me believe that the numbers we have are about the numbers we're going to stay with. But post-debate, he's actually doing weaker, given how many people have run to his fellow moderates, and I will loosely include Elizabeth Warren in the moderate category for this case, because she competes with him for the same white, educated, college degree-holding voters. But there's one number I want you to hold on to throughout all of this. Joe Biden, he's at 11%. He was at 11% on the last poll we looked at. And Sanders and Buttigieg have basically remained the same. But Biden's the one I want you to look at. Now let's go down to the actual preferred candidates. So second choices and preference of candidates. Now, unfortunately, they've axed Bloomberg, Yang, Gabbard on this one, which I think is a real shame, and Steyer, too, sorry, on this one, which I think is a real shame, but we'll get to the second choices in a moment. Let's focus on the preferred candidates. Now, compared to the last poll we looked at, Sanders on that one was at 67% definitely decided, 25% leaning towards him, and 8% still trying to decide. Now he's at 75%, which is a 8% increase of definitely decided. That is a great base to be at. That means 75% of the time, not 75% of the time, 75% of his numbers will probably definitely show up for him. And the leaning towards numbers, while they've shrunk, have actually cut into his still trying to decide numbers. That means, assuming fair weather conditions and everyone turning out who claim, all of these assuming they're likely voters, if we assume the undecideds just go, I'm not showing up, Sanders is going to lose basically none of his vote. He's going to keep 96% of his voters. And now let's go to Joe Biden. Remember how I emphasized 11% before? Joe Biden's numbers have basically gone unchanged from the last debate, from the last poll. He was at 67% in the last one, 68% here. 21% in the last one, 19% here. 12%, 13%. Incredibly static numbers, and that's what I predicted. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are going to benefit from the fact that they have very, very, very high floors compared to the rest of the candidates. We can assume that in most cases, Joe Biden's worst case scenario is he's going to poll at around, he's going to get 10% of the vote. Sanders, he's going to get around 28% of the vote. Those are good places to be at, especially for Joe Biden, who's seen a massive tanking in his campaign. But the opportunity for him is going to come up in a moment. Elizabeth Warren, in the previous one, she was polling at 44%, now 55, 24, 25, 31, 25. That is a good improvement for her, especially since she's gained in the polls. She's gained in the polls, which means a lot of the people coming to her are now definite on her. So this shows a growth in support. Same with Sanders. If you can increase the amount of people who are definitely for you, and you increase your numbers, that means you have a stronger chance of, at the very least in a primary, winning points on election day. Though she still is at a risk of losing a quarter of her vote. Amy Klobuchar, roughly the same deal, though I will point out her definitely decided numbers have dropped. She was at 63%, now she's at 47%. She has held her leaning numbers pretty well. 24 to 29, 5% difference. That's not that big, that's a shakeup, but still polling error difference. And the big thing for her is still trying to decide came over to her and is jumped from 13 to 24%, an 11-point increase. And I think she's actually taken some of these voters off of lower polling candidates, as well as a little bit off Pete Buttigieg. And speaking of Pete Buttigieg, his numbers have changed as well, and they've gone in the exact opposite direction he wants. He went from 53% definitely decided to 42% definitely decided, 16 to 27, and he's actually held the 31 it's still trying to decide. So what does this mean? Because in my opinion, the question here, and presented by these polling numbers, is not who will win. We can basically guess it's going to be Sanders unless Buttigieg sees a groundswelling of support, which is also possible. But in fact, with Buttigieg, it's the fact that he has kept the same amount of support, but he has, in essence, his support has started to waver to the tune of about 15%, which you don't want to see when you're in second. And I attribute the increase in this number, to his poor debate performance. He did not have a good debate in the last debate, and I think that's caused his numbers to begin to waver. And like I said, we've got two pre-debate performances, so I actually wonder if this is higher than was previously. But this is not a good place he wants to be in, because right now a third of his vote, 7% of his vote, is unsure. They're just saying Buttigieg. You don't want that, because a third of his vote, he's polling at 21 basically. I think it's like 21.65. He loses a third of that, he becomes non-viable. Ever so slightly non-viable, but non-viable. And if they go to someone else, they become viable. And this is why I bring back Joe Biden. Joe Biden has recently transitioned his campaign from being the Joe Biden is the most electable candidate campaign to Joe Biden is better than Pete Buttigieg. Because the Biden camp knows, okay, we've got a floor of about 11%. If we can take 4% of Pete's voters, we get delegates at the statewide level, which is where the most delegates are. So, what they need to do on election day is just have either enough of these guys not show up, which is possible, so make it so it's so hard for people to choose, they just go, I'm not doing it, I don't feel a candidate, I'm not showing up. Or say, well, I did go to Buttigieg, but because a lot of these Buttigieg voters came from Biden's camp. Let's go, I was feeling Buttigieg, but you know what? Joe has more experience. I'll put my vote in for Joe. This is not good for Buttigieg. His entire campaign has been based on the idea, I will get momentum from Iowa and be able to win every other race from there. Now, if you recall my election prediction video, I stated Buttigieg could come in second to Sanders in New Hampshire and still have a solid pathway to the nomination. That's still true. But these numbers have changed ever so slightly. I assumed he'd still have a strong opponent in the form of Biden, meaning Biden would still be holding a good chunk of the undecided voters. So Pete would just need to solidify his base. He still needs... So he's gotten to the, well, I can get second in New Hampshire with ease, but he hasn't solidified his base. Sanders, on the other hand, has a solid base. He has consolidated the progressive vote around him. And essentially, you've got 4 to 7 people, depending on how you count it, fighting for the same group of voters. A larger voting bloc, but one that's more fragmented. And right now, the only guy who's polling well enough to get delegates besides Sanders is Buttigieg. I'll put out my prediction tomorrow morning on the day of the primary, but this is not showing good signs for Buttigieg. If there's a surge with Warren, Klobuchar, or Biden, it's going to come at Pete's expense, not Sanders. And that's not a place he wants to be, because he'll also be heading into states he's weaker in. He has put almost all of his campaign funds into Iowa and New Hampshire. And the fact Klobuchar does seem to have a slight surge. It's not massive. I heard one person call it a Klobucharge, which I kind of like, but that's neither here nor there. That she was able to earn, since the debate, so 2 days, $3 million. Not amazing compared to what some of the other people have earned, but that has also helped her close up the gap in her war chest to Pete Buttigieg. Closing that gap is probably her main goal. As I said, her goal is to start clawing away at Buttigieg now that Biden's out of the picture. And what I'm seeing is both of them have very weak support. And that prediction I made about Buttigieg having, him and Warren will just keep trading voters back and forth, I think given the fact Warren has gained and solidified some of her base, I think this is actually going to happen between Pete and Amy if he doesn't manage to keep her down. I think on election day there's a good chance she may gain votes that Pete would have gotten, because as you can see, she's still taking 30% from Pete Buttigieg, and while that says down from 12%, we're going to actually be using the February 4th through 7th numbers to compare there, because I think that gives us a proper... We've got one that is entirely pre-debate and one that's half post-debate, so it kind of shows the changes. So we'll start with Amy because she's the most interesting part of this and is the most likely person to possibly cause Pete Buttigieg to drop into non-viability. So compared to the last poll we looked at, 24 were originally willing to go... I'm sorry, I'm looking at the Elizabeth Warren numbers. We didn't actually have Amy Klobuchar. Never mind. We'll start with Warren then. So she originally had a majority of her group say, okay, 24% of us will go Pete Buttigieg. Now it's 27, so there's been a slight gain for him, showing he's gone the name recognition, and the main person this reflects on is actually Biden and Sanders, because Sanders has dropped from 22 to 18, and Biden from 11 to 9. However, the biggest story is Klobuchar is now ahead by 1 point, gaining from 22 to 28, a 4-point jump as opposed to Pete's 3-point jump. And I am willing to guess this is all post-debate push. The more positive news there is for Klobuchar, the worse it is for Pete Buttigieg. For Joe Biden, on the other hand, you get the exact same story. Amy Klobuchar is surging ever so slightly, because Pete Buttigieg, last time for Joe Biden, was sitting around 3. And keep in mind, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and Pete Buttigieg, their numbers have not changed. So these are not numbers changing because people hopped off ship, most likely. These are the numbers and people's opinions are just changing. For Joe, it went from 27 for Pete to 23, and Amy jumped from 12 to 19. I'm willing to bet that was all taken from Pete Buttigieg. All of it. Warren also had a little jump. She went from 16 to 17. That's a polling that's within the margin of error by far, but it shows Pete has been losing support as the second choice along a lot of these moderates, which means these numbers are unlikely to jump to Pete in the election cycle for New Hampshire. And he needs as much support as he gets. If this turns into Sanders got first, Buttigieg got second, Warren got if you can start listing off names, it's not a two-person race, which is what Buttigieg wants. And Sanders dropped from 15% to 11%. Not shocking to me. I think people are starting to solidify along certain party lines, and I won't be surprised if some of them went to Klobuchar or Warren. As for Pete himself, this is the biggest shakeup for me. Sanders went from 16 to 28. That says something happened in the debate to me. Because for everyone else, Sanders lost support. I can assume he lost support for Klobuchar too. But for Buttigieg, he gained, and that says to me a lot of them are basing it off name recognition, which means in Pete's worst-case scenario, this 31% goes to Sanders. And he definitely doesn't want that, because he loses his Sanders group, it's kind of over for him. Joe Biden managed to lose points going from 24 to 19, a 5-point drop. Warren has managed to also drop a bit, dropping from 21 to 16. We're seeing a lot of people coalescing around Sanders in Buttigieg's side, which I find incredibly interesting. And Klobuchar dropped too, from 17 to 11. So I think Klobuchar attacking Buttigieg might have discouraged people to go after Buttigieg, while Sanders, who was sort of the neutral arbiter of the debate, gets to hang on to some of his support, or looked good in their eyes. But lastly, we have Sanders. Elizabeth Warren lost 4%, going down to 40. Still, this says a vast majority of these people are going progressive over everyone else. Buttigieg went from 15% to 14%. That seems like a statistical error to me. As you can see, he apparently had a midpoint jump, but that has gone down. And Joe Biden went from 8% to 5%. That's another drop, and Amy has hung around 1%. This says to me Sanders supporters are now jumping to more minor candidates. This could be Steyer. Steyer gave a very strong support, full-throated support of Sanders, and came across very positively in the last debate. It could also be they're going to someone like Yang, or basically they might have decided they don't like these four, so they're just going to say someone else, because they're polling at 1%. They're most likely polling at below 1%. But here we also see the second choice ratio for everyone. Warren is slowly dropping. She's lost 2 points, going from 22 to 20%. But she's still the vast favorite for second choices. This is why I think it's a little bit silly whenever people talk about, well, if X drops out, it'll help either Sanders or Buttigieg. I think if people drop out, the main beneficiary will always be Warren, because she's the one who has the most to gain from being everyone's second choice. While Sanders has overtaken Buttigieg, gaining 2 points, while Buttigieg has lost a net of 1 on second choices. This says, I think the debate. I'm willing to bet the debate is the worst thing to happen to Buttigieg, and it couldn't have happened. The only way it could have happened at worst time would be if the debate had happened last night. And everyone was going, ew, this guy's not doing too hot, and all the spin had yet to take. Interestingly enough, Joe Biden keeps dropping. He's dropped 3%, while Klobuchar has managed to kind of hang on at around 10 to 9%. And Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang, I'm willing to bet, are cannibalizing each other's voters for the second choice. And there you go. Tom Steyer has an increase of about 2 points, as do people like Deval Patrick and minor candidates. And the last thing I'll look at is just the general preferences. Forgive me, I need to quickly go up on the other side. Sanders has lost amongst younger people, but it's interesting who he's lost to. He has lost a total of 10% with women 18 to 35, but overall, his opponents don't seem to have gained much. I'm willing to bet Klobuchar has been the main beneficiary, though we're not seeing her come up here. I'm wondering if there was a polling mistake or something along those lines. Because Buttigieg got 13%, or maybe it's no one, I don't know. But Buttigieg only jumped up 3%, as did Warren, from 10% to 13% and 13% to 16%. Biden lost 1, going to 9%. While amongst men, Sanders dropped quite a bit, losing an additional 7 points from 44 to 37. However, Buttigieg only gained 2 points from 21 to 23. Warren lost 1 point, and actually Biden is the main beneficiary, gaining 3 points. The biggest gain out of a lot of them. This just says to me the younger cohort is a lot more contentious right now. Meanwhile, 35 to 95 have actually remained solid and actually have really good numbers for Sanders. He's jumped up 5 points in women from 28 to 33. This is compared to Buttigieg, who's only gained 3 points, 25 to 28, and Warren, who actually also had a really good increase of about 4% from 17 to 21. Joe Biden has dropped off the map, which I assume means he has no support. But that's the best guess I have. Amy Klobuchar has lost 4%. So Joe Biden went from 6% to non-existent, and Amy Klobuchar lost 4%, going to 2%. Amongst men, Sanders had the biggest gain, gaining 12% from 39 to 51. Buttigieg actually lost support by 1%. Warren lost support by 4%, and Biden lost support by 1%. Klobuchar, once again, not appearing. 50 to 64. This is another fascinating change. Buttigieg has only gained 1 net point, from 22 to 23. Sanders, however, gained 6, from 12 to 18. Klobuchar held steady at 10%. Warren gained 2 points, 6% to 8%, and Joe Biden lost 3 points, from 9% to 6%. For men, Sanders had another big jump, though it was almost identical to Buttigieg. Sanders gained 5%, Buttigieg gained 5%, 18 to 23 and 22 to 27 respectively. Klobuchar also gained. She gained 2 points, jumping from 8% to 10%. Warren lost 1 point, and Joe Biden lost 5 points. And lastly, 65 and older. A major voting bloc, and probably one that's going to completely shake up this race from what I'm looking at. Because Buttigieg is losing support with them fast. I think Joe Biden might be winning back some of the old bloc. 29% to 20% for Pete Buttigieg, while Biden jumped from 22 to 25. Amy Klobuchar also is the biggest beneficiary. I think she took the most from Buttigieg. going from 8% to 18%. Sanders lost support as well, losing about 7% from 13 to 8. And Elizabeth Warren also lost 1 point of support. And in men, the drop is equally awful for Buttigieg, where he dropped from 24% to 18%, while Joe Biden gained 7%, going from 9% to 26%. Klobuchar held steady again at 3%, while Sanders actually gained, going from 6% to 11%, and Warren held steady. What this says to me is Buttigieg's big weakness is his lack of a coalition. And I think his coalition, if he can't do really well in New Hampshire, is gone. Totally, utterly gone. I think these numbers are liable to scatter, and they need to do something to cement their base if they want a chance going into Super Tuesday. You do not want 4 candidates fighting it out who essentially all have a baseline of about 10%. That's what happens when you take these numbers. Warren is closer to about 8%, Amy around 8%, but Biden's at about 10 to 11, Buttigieg is about 10 to 11. And all of them have about 8 to 10 % of the vote to lose. And if they keep shifting it around, they're only going to fracture the vote. And I think that will also keep them all in. As long as no one has a cemented lead, as long as no one has a coalesced base who will only vote for them, Sanders will beat them all. So that's what I'm going to end you with. The message as CNN is not, ooh, well, it looks like Sanders is going to win New Hampshire by about 8 to 10%, or 6 to 10% if you actually factor in the overall polling. Or someone's surging or someone's declining. It is the fact no one has a solid base outside of Sanders, and it's really easy for a guy who's solidified his own base to start grabbing people from other people's bases, being the only consistent candidate. And with that being said, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like down below. If you have something you'd like to add or a question you'd like to ask, please leave a comment. Otherwise, if you want to see more content from this channel, please click the subscribe button and push the notification bell. It will alert you when new content comes out. Otherwise, as always, have a wonderful day.